God of heaven, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to open your word and look back through history and see where we are today and how you've been leading. And I just pray that you would be with each one of us here, help us to have our minds open to the understanding and the teachings that you have for us at this time. May the study go smoothly and may hearts be blessed is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so the last time we looked at redemption, and so I'm just going to draw this chart. This was time, and up here I had goodness. Oh, sorry. And then, does anybody know what this line represents? Does anyone remember what this line represents? Can you see that okay? I can't tell.
Yes, we can see it. Maybe not the writing. It's a bit blurry, but we can see.
The line like our walk or
our walk? No.
Which line are you pointing to?
So this one here. So there's this is goodness at the top. This is time. And
So progression.
Sorry, what did you say, Jonathan?
Progression.
Yeah. So sanctification, progression of what though? I don't want to put progression on there, but it is a progression of something.
Our growing in knowledge and experience of goodness. I don't know. Sanctification. I don't know.
Okay. It's redemption.
That's right.
Which is similar to sanctification. So this is a progression of redemption, and it starts at a lower level and it continually increases. So the broadest definition of redemption would be closeness to God or being his counterpart. And if we take this as the definition, then we know that redemption would never end, because if that is the definition, to be close to God or to be his counterpart, then that would be something that continues on. Okay, so I also had in here 3 different histories. Does anyone remember what histories we discussed? And starting with ours, this is our history. There were 2 other ones. Does anyone remember what they were?
all right.
Yeah, what time? Yeah, 1860s was another one. That might be small. That's sorry. Anybody else for the other history? Make this bigger. See, this is 2020, 1860. One more. 1890s. Okay, so we looked at this last time, and so we know based on history that the Advent could have taken place, the second Advent could have taken place in any one of these at any one of these 2 time periods. And because of this, because of understanding this, then we know that there's a portion of redemption that is done on earth, and then there is a portion of redemption that is done in heaven. So as you know, in the 1860s, so let's say Christ had come at this time here. If he had come, then redemption would have happened up until this point here, but it would have continued the work that was done from this time period, all the things that they learned and were educated on would have had to continue in heaven. So this would have been heaven. I hope that's making sense, or just a refresher for those of you who were here last time. So I'm going to just erase that because we know he didn't come at that time period. And what we need to do now is we need to look at our time period and realize that what has taken place 130 years before this time period. So we really have to be aware of the issues and the different things that have taken place in that history for us. So why is this graph? I'm just going to put a line here because this is potentially when Christ could come. We're just going to put it, I mean, he will come at the second advent. So Christ is going to come in our, close to our time period. And so all the redemption that's done on earth up until this point, there still will be a portion that needs to be continued in heaven. So this illustration that was given, sorry,
Would have been born.
sorry. So this illustration is very important for us because in the past, this has been discussed, but it hasn't been proven well. So what the methodology that we have has done is open up the scripture to allow us to be able to see the past with, I guess, new eyes and be able to see into the future as well. So, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Okay, so in the 1860s, as we discussed before, they were dealing with a lot of issues, but the test at that time was on slavery. And so during this time period, there were still slaves. So if the people at this time had gone to heaven, they would have had to learn what equality meant for their time. They would have learned that in heaven. And what this has done for us is it's painted a picture of the 144,000. So the 144,000, I don't know about you, but for me, you always had a picture of them being this glorious group of people. They got everything right. They were doing everything right. And you would just know who they were.
Sung the song of Moses.
They sung the song of Moses, sure. And what this has done for us is it's painted us a picture that shows us that these people are not, like, the glorious picture that is portrayed is not really reality. And it's actually a much darker picture. And even though it's a darker picture of that, it's also more realistic. And for me, it's been very encouraging because especially knowing that you're supposed to strive to be a part of this number. So it's encouraging because you know that you have the opportunity to be part of that number. And it's just more realistic. That's the easiest way I can put it. So I'm going to share my screen. This will work. Because I want us to read a quote. So I'm not able to share. If someone can just, I don't know how to. I can't share. Is it because this is plugged in? Can I unplug this?
I just tried again. I just added multiple participants.
So why doesn't it show me? Whatever. Share. Okay, so I'll just, okay. Is it shared now?
Yeah.
Okay, so if someone can read this for me, that would be great.
Who's on the right side? It is true that there may be an outward correctness of deportment without the renewing of Christ, or without the renewing power of Christ. The love of influence and the desire for the esteem of others may produce a well-ordered life. Self-respect may lead us to avoid the appearance of evil. A selfish heart may perform generous actions. By what means, then, shall we determine whose side we are on? Who has the heart? With whom are our thoughts? Of whom do we love to converse? Who has our warmest affections and our best energies? If we are Christ's, our thoughts are with him, and our sweetest thoughts are of him. All we have and are is consecrated to him. We long to bear his image, breathe his spirit, and do his will, and please him in all things.
Thank you. So, why this is so difficult. Okay, there it is. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so in this quote, it talks about how people can do things, right, and have this outer appearance of being generous, or but it shows like deep within that we don't really know why someone is doing what they're doing. So when I think of the 144,000, thinking you'll just be able to recognize them because there'll be this, glorious group of people. This quote from Sept to Christ is something that I think we would all do well to just ask ourselves. That last paragraph, that's why I bolded it, because for us, if we're striving to be part of this group, what you want to ask yourself is, who has your heart? Where are your thoughts? Who do you love talking about? Because that is going to tell you which side you're on. So when we look at this this line of redemption and we consider people, what ends up happening is those people who have died and prior to this time period, they are going to be confronted with many issues when they get to heaven. So that even includes the great men of history, so even the great reformers. Wycliffe and Martin Luther and William Tyndale, these great men will also be resurrected with issues that they're going to be confronted with because they didn't live as long as in the history of redemption to know God as much as we do. Because I guess I probably have to stop sharing the screen in order for you to see. So if you can see here, if this is goodness at the top, each history, you're increasing in that understanding of who God is. And so you're like going up. And I think I might have mentioned this before, but it could even be like a ladder, like you're climbing towards God. You're getting closer to God the further that time goes on. So I was looking into William Tyndale this week, and he has an amazing story. Very inspiring. So I don't know if you all are familiar with what he did, but he was able to translate the Bible from Latin into English. His desire was that all the people would able to read in their own language God's word and have a connection with God. And what I found amazing was that when he was betrayed and eventually he was burnt at the stake, it says his dying words were, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." And when I read that, it made me think of Stephen when he was being stoned. And it's like the people who at that time or in the past who loved God and wanted to serve him, their desire was for people to see God, to know God, even though those people are actually killing them. So I think it's very powerful. But when we consider this graph, we have to understand that those people, as close as they were to God, in many ways, their understanding of God was not only limited, but it was actually wrong. And so this might be hard for some people to comprehend, but those great people of the past will have issues that they have to deal with. So can someone tell me what there's only one thing we can take to heaven. What is that? What is the one thing we can take?
Characters.
Yes. So our character. Okay, so our character is the only thing that we can take to heaven. So I'm gonna just share again. If somebody can, okay, so that's William Tyndale. Someone can read this next quote for me. Maybe Kathy, was that you?
Yes, okay.
Thanks.
Only one treasure. A character formed according to the divine likeness is the only treasure that we can take from this world to the next. Those who are under the instruction of Christ in this world will take every divine attainment with them to the heavenly mansions. And in heaven, we are continually to improve. How important then is the development of the character in this life?
Thank you.
So-
So that is just confirming that the only thing that we're going to be able to take with us to heaven is our character. And what is our character made up of? Does anyone know? Yeah. That's not what I'm looking for.
Thoughts
right
and
now. You're on
feelings.
my way. Thoughts and feelings combined. Yes. That's just where it's taken from. So our character is made up of our thoughts and our feelings. And so when we die, so like Martin Luther, William Tyndale, when they died, they have the same character that they had when they passed away. Their character doesn't change over time, even though time keeps going, or has kept going. For them, their character is where they are, is where they'll remain until they're resurrected. So it's just like now, if I go to sleep tonight, when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to have the same thoughts and feelings that I had just before I went to bed. It doesn't change over like during the night. And if someone can read this next quote, can't see who's online, so anyone can just read it. Oh no, I didn't want to. Yeah, this one.
I can read it. Character remains the same. The character you bear in probationary time will be the character you will have at the coming of Christ. If you would be a saint in heaven, you must first be a saint on earth. The traits of character you cherish in life will not be changed by death or by the resurrection. You will come up from the grave with the same disposition you manifested in your home and in society. Jesus does not change the character at his coming. The work of transformation must be done now. Our daily lives are determining our destiny. AA 16.2.
Yes, thank you very much. So this is just showing us again what I've already said is that our characters don't change, so they stay the same. And what stood out for me when I read this, I've known this quote for a long time, but now with the knowledge that we have, it's interesting, and I underlined it's society. So you will come up from the grave with the same disposition you manifested in your home and in society. And so that was really powerful because those people who have died here will have to go through an education process because we know that things have changed a lot since that time period. Another point is that the laws that govern our bodies now, in a sinful body, the laws that govern our body is going to be the same laws that will govern a sinless body. So we have to understand that the rules don't change in heaven, they stay the same. So when we consider the subject of the nature of man, the nature of man is, I'll just stop sharing again. So the nature of man is, I'll give you a hint, it's threefold. So what is it made up of?
Mind, spirit, and body. Mind, spirit, and body.
I'm referring to the studies that were done on the nature of man, part 1. And the hint is that it's threefold. The nature of man is threefold. It's a, okay, you know what? We'll just read it.
Physical, intellectual, and moral.
Yes, thanks, Jonathan. So the nature of man. Okay, so it is your intellect, your moral, and your physical. Okay, so this is the threefold nature of man. So we'll read the quote so everyone can understand where we get this from. Can you see this? Trevor, do you want to read it? Sorry, I didn't realize you don't have it. Okay, can somebody else read this quote?
Threefold nature of man. The nature of man is threefold, and the training enjoined by Solomon comprehends the right development of the physical, intellectual, and moral powers. To perform this work aright, parents and teachers must themselves understand the way the child should go. This embraces more than a knowledge of books or the learning of the schools. It comprehends the practice of temperance, brotherly kindness, and godliness, the discharge of our duty to ourselves, to our neighbors, and to God.
Thank you. So as you can see, it's right up there in the first sentence. So physical, intellectual, and moral powers. There's also another way that it can be divided into two. So the nature of man can be divided into two. Does anybody know what that is?
The upper and lower passions.
Yes, thank you. So higher. Is it passions? Is that what it is?
Powers.
Powers.
So higher powers and lower powers. That is right.
Powers, right, powers. Yeah, sorry.
So does anyone know what the theme is of the first part of the nature of man? So if this is part one, what the theme would be for this one?
We can't see you because screen share's on.
I thought I stopped it. I'm not sharing my screen.
I think you just have to pin Tiffany's camera.
Yeah, I did stop the screen share. So does anyone know the theme for the nature of man part one? Like if you had to put a theme on it, what would it be? Okay, I'll just tell you. This is really sketchy. It's willpower. So if there was a theme for part one, it would be willpower. Okay. And nature of man part two would be what? Anyone knows? It's not been studied yet or talked about. But it's habits. So this is one that we need to focus more on now. So if our sinful bodies need to be educated using the principle of habits, then also our sinless bodies will also need to have that education as well, and the same rules will apply. And this, at least for me, it may come as a surprise for many, and it was. I mean, I think everything has been a surprise as you learn, but it's not some. When you get to heaven, there's not some like imaginary fairy. We have this imaginary and fairy tale idea of what it would be like, of how we would act and how we would do things, when really it's not going to be much different than now, right? Because the same rules will apply. And so whatever we're doing here on earth will be what we'll continue to do in heaven, right? Because again, if the people at this time, if Christ had come, they would have woken up with the same mind that they had, and okay, they would have been translated, never mind. So, but the people who have died would have had to learn, but they still would have had to also grow in understanding of who God is and what that looks like and how to treat one another and that kind of thing. So nothing is going to happen by default. We're not going to just wake up and then all of a sudden everything's going to be easy, so to say. And so someone like Martin Luther or William Tyndale, even though they loved God and they really gave their life to do his will, they still are going to resurrect and have a damaged mind. So okay, and that goes on to say that the time period in the past 500 years ago, society, their perspective of how society should run is very different. And so they're going to have to go through a training process, both for their will, which is the inner man, and also for their sinless bodies, which is the outer man, because we know that the inner man controls the outer man. So there is an advantage to doing this in heaven. And what is that advantage when we're in heaven? To
We'll
continue.
have great teachers like you.
Sorry, I missed that, Kathy.
I said, we'll have great teachers like you.
I don't know about
I'm
that.
serious. I'm
That's-
serious.
Okay,
It's gonna be a much better place to learn in heaven these
Yes.
things. Because
so
we will,
Yeah.
sorry, Kathy, the question is, what is the advantage that we have in heaven
Here.
over here?
And what?
To grow in goodness, to grow closer to God, to be close to Him. What's the advantage?
Sin dragging us down.
Sin is a choice, right? Sorry, I don't know if you can hear Trevor, but he said there's no sin dragging us down.
No temptation?
No temptation. There's no tempter. So that's one of them. There's going to be no tempter, and also the environment. I think, Kathy, maybe you touched on that a little bit. So the actual environment of heaven will make it a lot easier. But the same rules apply, and the same way that we have to use our minds will be the same in heaven. It will just be easier because we won't have a tempter and we'll be in a perfect environment. So I guess why the study was really powerful for me was that the 144,000, they're not as developed as you would think. Like I always believed that this group at the end of the world was this, and they are, because the Bible says that they're a special group. They get to serve God in the temple day and night. And so you have this picture of them. But when you consider history, then you realize that these people, as special as they are, they still have an education that they have to go through, and that education continues in heaven. So when I consider this thought, I think of this, the harvest illustration where the sower comes and he sows a seed, and then, this plant grows, and Ellen White says that this plant is perfect at every stage. So I don't know what I'm doing here. So there's a verse also that comes to mind. So even though it's just a seed here, this plant continues to grow. If we can go to Romans 9:28, this is a verse that came to mind, and if somebody would read that for me.
I can read. Romans 9:28. For he shall finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because a short work will the Lord make upon the earth.
Perfect. Thank you. So I liked this, or this came to mind because it says our work is cut short in righteousness, which means, for me, how I understand is that even though we're on this journey, let me just stop share. So even though we're on this journey, getting closer and closer to the Lord, He cuts it short in righteousness. So you're on this pathway and you're perfect at every stage, but you're still growing, and He cuts it short in righteousness. So an important question that we can ask ourselves is, how can God trust someone from 500 or 2,000 years ago, or 4,000 or 6,000 years ago? How can He trust these people who have died in the past? Are there any thoughts or ideas on that?
Because
Yeah.
Because they how do you say it? They had good habits. They formed good habits, so that if they made if they were forming good habits to make proper choices on issues in their time, then they would continue to do that in heaven.
Right. Yes. And also we know that God is obviously a good judge of character. And so he's able to read us better than we're able to read ourselves. And also, if you can consider Satan in the Garden of Eden, what did it appear like he could do regarding Eve?
Make her
I
into
guess
a god.
Say that again.
It appeared that he could make her into a god.
Okay, that wasn't what I was going for. So it appeared that he could read her mind. It appeared because he was able to, and he can do this. He made such accurate predictions, but he couldn't read her mind. We know that he couldn't read her mind, but he could analyze her character, her behavior well, and he does that today as well. So how God can make a judgment is, and I think we all experience this in our own lives. When you know someone really well, you tend to figure out, you're not so surprised, right? When you're close to people that you know, like especially, in my family, I was home and, spending time with my nieces. So when you know people well, you know what to expect from them. It's not really a surprise. And God obviously knows us better than we know ourselves. But even Satan, he does this as well in our day-to-day lives. So I want to read a quote. This is one, I always say, like, this is my favorite quote, but there are many quotes that I like, but this quote is one that I often think about, and it's because for me, it's really powerful. It's the second half that's powerful, but we'll read it because it's the whole paragraph. So if somebody would like to read this first slide.
I'll read.
Thank you.
How to defeat Satan. We have had great light and privileges at these meetings, and now let us retain the impressions that have been made upon our hearts. When we feel the least inclined to commune with Jesus, let us pray the most. By so doing, we shall break Satan's snare. The clouds of darkness will disappear, and we shall realize the sweet presence of Jesus. Let us here resolve that we will not sin against God with our lips, that we will never speak in a light or trifling manner, that we will never murmur or complain at the providence of God, and that we will not become accusers of our brethren.
You can keep reading.
Okay. We cannot always hinder the thoughts that come as temptations, but we can resist the enemy so that we shall not utter them. The adversary of souls is not permitted to read the thoughts of men, but he is a keen observer, and he marks the words and actions and skillfully adapts his temptations accordingly. If all would labor to repress sinful thoughts and feelings, giving them no expression in words or action, Satan would be defeated, for he would not know how to prepare his, precious temptations to meet their cases.
Thank you. So here it tells us clearly, I don't know if it was, so he's not permitted to read the thoughts of men. So Satan can't read our thoughts. He's not allowed to, and he doesn't have that privilege. And what I love about this quote is it tells us how to defeat Satan. And it tells us that if we repress our sinful thoughts and feelings, giving them no expression in words or acts, he's done. He doesn't know what to do. So when we have trials and temptations, we really ought to consider this and really try to, for our own benefit, to not express in words or acts that he knows how to get us, because like I said before, he's a very keen observer, and he is trying to break each one of us down. And especially during this time period, I know a lot of us are struggling. And if he doesn't know how to get us down, because if we're not expressing it in words or acts, then it will be much harder for him to throw things our way. Going back to the understanding of those who have died in the faith, they will need to be educated. And just like we are in this process today of being educated, our thoughts and feelings matter, because how we think and how we, okay, as I said before, our thoughts and feelings combined make up our character, but also, as Trevor had mentioned, our habits do. So how we think ends up playing out in our daily lives, in our actions. So if someone can read this next quote.
For
Habits
some
form
reason.
character.
Go ahead, John.
Never forget that thoughts work out actions. Repeated actions form habits, and habits form character. The Bible is to be the rule of life. It is marvelous in the eyes of the universe of heaven that men who teach the word do not always practice the truth. Do you realize what it means to be complete in Christ Jesus, the revealed will of God? His word is not dishonored by being brought into practical life to form habits which will develop character.
Thank you. Okay, so back to the question on how can God make a judge of someone 2,000 years ago when they're so limited in their understanding. So let me just add this. I think I'm going to erase this one. So this is just that God cuts us short in righteousness. So I'm going to erase this. So if we consider, I think this might be out actually. We consider 2,000 years ago, what time period is that? Roughly, this is like a rough estimate. 2,000 years ago.
The end of ancient Israel.
Okay, so Christ. And if we went 4,000 years ago, that would be the time period of around Noah, I guess, right? And then 6,000 years ago, we could say Adam and Eve. Okay, so when we do this, what are we doing? What methodology are we using, our principle?
Line upon line, or compare and contrast.
Yeah, line upon line, compare and contrast. Also, with this one, if this is the beginning, this is the end. The alpha and omega, the beginning and the end, right, is also a method or principle. Does anybody know where this verse is found? The Bible verse that gives us this principle of alpha and omega? Revelation, no.
Also the omega.
Oh yeah, well, that is part of it, but I'll just share it. So it's in Isaiah 56:10. You want to read it?
46:10.
Yeah,
That should be.
46:10. Yeah, that's my. I'm not gonna fix it now.
Declaring the end from the beginning allows us to know that those people could be trusted in him. On the verse.
No, that's not a verse. Sorry, those are my words. That's a typo. So if somebody has I have my Bible, I will read it. Isaiah 46, not 56. Okay. Okay, so Isaiah 46:10 says, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasures. That's my mistake. So, I'm gonna edit that. Okay, so God can be confident in a person 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, or even 6,000 years ago, because that history is the same. I want to say the same history as ours. They have the same issues that we have. And they're going to be confronted with similar tests that we're confronted with. So in the time of Christ, their history especially was very similar to ours. And so when God makes an assessment of their characters, when God is assessing us, he can also consider them if they had the light that we have. Does that make sense?
Measure recorded.
Yes.
Right. So he's brought them through tests. He's bringing us through tests. And because they had similar tests and we're having similar tests, then he can judge based on that whether or not they would pass the test in this time period. So that is, okay, I'm going to draw another one next. Okay, so this is, I don't know. I think so. Okay, I'm going to erase this because I can use it here. Okay, so if we have a line of history and this is the end, this is the beginning. I'm not gonna do justice to this, but this is a candle, a light, and this light just continues to grow over time. Oh, this is really bad. But eventually it grows and what I find interesting with this understanding, I guess this isn't exactly how it's done. I've seen other ones done, but this is how I like it, is we have all of the light from the past. So from this point to now, if this is now, let's say, we have all of this light accumulated. And because we have that, it actually shines brighter into the future and we can actually see into the future. So what was my point with that? I guess my point is that only because they didn't have as much light as we have today, they still did have light and they still did have tests in that time, and they had to pass those tests in order to be saved, I guess. If they passed, they would have died in the faith. Okay, so in Christ's line specifically, for Christ's time period, basically we're dealing with a lot of the similar things. So similar tests. In their time, the Jews said, well, they basically got into bed with the Roman government, and they were telling the king that Christ wasn't their king and that, you're our king. And so the issues are the same, and we're actually getting a lot of our Bible verses from that time period. So the book of John, the epistles of John, Revelation, all the stories about equality, the golden rule, all of those are taken from that history. And so it's very similar to our history. So I want to go to Hebrews 11, verse 39. We're not going to use Paul's application. We're going to use to look at these verses. So somebody wants to read them. Okay, I will read this. And it says, and all these,
It's because we
sorry, I didn't hear you, Maka.
I was just saying we would read, but we could I couldn't see. I don't know if everybody else could see your screen.
Okay,
Yeah, but I can read it if you like.
sure. Thanks.
Okay, Hebrews 11, verse 39 to 40. And all these happening obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. So this promise and the way he's explaining it is that Christ and the people alive in the New Testament history, they received the better part. Those people in the past should not be made perfect or redeemed without that generation. And if we take this principle that all the people that have died in Christ, then they can't be perfect or resurrected without us, the 144,000. So unless we have our house in order, then the great controversy can't come to an end. Okay, people hundreds or thousands of years ago, as I mentioned before, their level of redemption only reached a certain height. And so the proof that God can take humanity and make something special of them can't happen until the very end. And this is because redemption is coming to its completion. So as we're living today, you and I, God is using us to prove to the universe that if we can do it, if we can change our thoughts and our minds, and he can transform us into his likeness, then it's evidence for those people who have died in the past that if they were given those same opportunities, that same knowledge and education, that they also would make those same changes, and they would be reflecting God. That, I hope that's making sense. Basically, God needs evidence. He needs us to prove to the universe that his laws can be kept and his ways are good and righteous. And I guess perfection and arriving at perfection, the word perfect itself, you have to clarify what you mean by perfect. Like I drew on the board, that plant is perfect at every stage. So if our definition of perfection is God, then we know that it's a work of a lifetime. It goes on forever. There is no end to that. And we would never arrive, actually, but we would get pretty close. And so then if that is the definition of perfection, then when will God end the great controversy? When will the great controversy end? It's up to him. He comes to a place where he says, you know what? I think it's gone long enough. The point has been proven and we can stop it here, right? And we know that he tried twice in the past. In the 1860s, he would have come in the 1890s, but he didn't. And so our understanding is that this is his third attempt to gather people together that will reflect his image, that will prove, I guess, to the universe that God's ways are good and it is possible to follow his laws and yeah. So And so when that happens, two things can happen. So when we stand, like when we decide that we're going to follow Christ and that we're going to be part of bringing this great controversy to an end, when it does come to an end, those people who have died in the past will be able to go to heaven, but also we will, knowing that they have a work to do, but also we will go to heaven knowing that we still also have a work to do. We just begin on earth, right? So it's really encouraging. It was for me anyways, when I started to understand this, because it helps motivate you to do the right things. Because you know that it's right, but you know that it's not pointless. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but for myself personally, I know that I've really struggled in the past where I would try to do the right thing and I mess up, and then it was just, it was almost depressing and frustrating. I think the difference with the knowledge that we have now is that, one, it's attainable. It takes effort and time, and a lot of time. It doesn't happen overnight. And if I don't finish, I don't want to say that I can't finish figuring out here, but it is a work of a lifetime. It continues to go on. And I think that the most important thing is that our minds are changing, that we are allowing him to educate us and to receive it. It might not be easy. It's not easy for a lot of people. But if you think about, what I like to think about is the time of in the 1800s, when slavery was accepted by Christians. Like, not only did they accept it, Christians had slaves. And when I think of that, it's really hard for my brain to comprehend that. But that was the reality at that time. I would say for most of us here, I'll just speak for myself, but I think I can include all of this, is that God actually legitimately has written on our hearts his law, right? In regards to that specifically. So we actually hate sin. We actually hate it. Like if you heard of someone being enslaved today, I can't imagine that any one of us would be like, okay, that's fine. Like, I think that we would actually hate it. Like, I know I do. It's disgusting, right? So that's what God wants to do. He is writing his law on our hearts, and he's doing it for all of these different things that we're learning, but it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But the more that we contemplate his ways, the more that will happen. His law written on our heart, I mean. Okay, so I also do, I'm not, okay, so this is obviously not to scale. So if we were to draw this to scale, it would look something more like this, which is like, just like little lines here at the beginning. Like, this is just like you can't see it, and you're not really supposed to, because we've only been here for such a short time. And when you compare that to eternity, most of the work of redemption will be done in heaven. And so there's very little that's actually happening here on earth. And what's sad is that even though Satan has an influence over us, a lot of what we do is without his temptations. Like, we hurt people because we want to, because he doesn't have to tempt us to do it. We just do it because we want to. And so, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned it earlier, we have to have our house in order. And so what does it mean to have our house in order? what does that look like? Any thoughts?
Hurting people?
Yeah, we're not hurting people. I guess what I'm talking about is our minds. Our minds need to be in order. And for our minds to be in order, we also need to understand the influence of our bodies over our minds, because our physical nature does affect our mental. And so to have our minds in order doesn't necessarily mean that you're not dealing with depression, for example, because some people are created with depressive tendencies, and every human is unique, and some people are extroverted, some people are introverted. So when we think about having balance and order in our lives, it's really broad, and it actually will vary from person to person. But even at that, no matter how uneducated we are, or how, I hate to use the word damaged, but if we're damaged, no matter how broken we are as a human, all of us can follow the same basic rules. And I think that we can all say that we know that it's never okay to be rude to someone or to shout at someone. Those are just unacceptable behaviors. And we can't come up with excuses for doing those things. Even anyone will know that. So that's what I'm talking about when I say we have to have our house in order. We have to understand the golden rule. And I know for us, the test right now is on equality. And so how we treat others right now is really important. So we need to keep that in mind. So I don't know if I want to keep going or if I just want to end there. Okay, I'm just going to read this last part, I guess. Equality is really simple to understand. Many of us have bad habits, and we must understand the science of how habits work. The theory is not complicated. However, putting it into practice might be difficult, at least in the beginning. I guess the problem is that many people are actually complaining that they're required to do these things. And that's the biggest problem or obstacle, where you don't even want to change. It's one thing to have a difficulty to change, but it's another thing to not want to change at all. And we need, as I said before, we need to get to a point where we hate sin, and that we have God's laws written on our hearts. So I think I'm going to close with this last quote, just for us to ponder, and then I'm going to have a word of prayer. So let me share this last quote, everyone. Humanity is made in the image of God. The life of Christ is to be revealed in humanity. Man was the crowning act of the creation of God, made in the image of God and designed to be a counterpart of God. But Satan has labored to obliterate the image of God in man and to imprint upon him his own image. Man is very dear to God because he was formed in his own image. This fact should impress us with the importance of teaching by precept and example the sin of defiling, by the indulgence of appetite, or by any other sinful practice, the body, which is designed to represent God to the world. The medical missionary can do a great amount of good by educating the people how to live. In order to understand the value which God places upon man, we need to comprehend the plan of redemption, the costly sacrifice which our Savior made to save the human race from eternal ruin. That's found in the Review and Herald. So hopefully we can ponder this thought that We're the crowning act of creation, and we were made in God's image, and may we all strive to fulfill God's design for us in our lives. If you kneel with me, let's close in prayer. Father in heaven, I just thank you so much for your goodness and your grace, and I pray, Lord, that you would help us to continue to honor you in our lives. May your will be done in our lives, and may each of us take the time that it takes to educate ourselves with a better knowledge of you, of who you are, your love and your goodness, that it can actually transform our lives, and we may be living epistles, and that people would notice that you are in us, living through us. Thank you for these things. I pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay,
Thank you, Tiffany.
so we can stop the recording.
We'll keep the recording going. If we're going to have any discussion or questions regarding the topic that was discussed, we'll just leave the recording going until any discussion is closed. If anyone has any points to make or any questions to ask Tiffany.
I do have a
Can
comment
you
to make.
make your,
Go ahead. Sorry.
can you make your quotes available? You know what I'm saying? All
Yes.
the quotes that you did, can you
Sure.
make those available somehow? Okay, thank you.
I'll edit mine as well, for sure. Any other thoughts or comments? Anything that wasn't clear?
I was just thinking about like those other periods, the 1860, what did you have written there? Can you move over a little bit? 1890s. I guess one of the requirements for them was like Christ could have come in that time. And obviously a lot of things would have had to, a lot of growth would have still had to have happened in heaven, things that we've appreciated in our time. But they failed in those histories. Those were histories of failure. So Christ, it was all, what's the word? Circumstantial, like whether Christ was going to return or not in that time. And I guess the requirement for them in regards to the test, it doesn't mean that people from that time wouldn't be saved, I assume. But that as a collective group of people, they had a requirement to give a message on those subjects that they were being tested upon. Is that how? Yeah.
Yeah.
So in order for us in our history to be a history of success, it wouldn't only be an individual thing. It would, the collective group would still have to successfully give this message, the three angels' messages, the third angel's message in particular, the way that God had planned.
Yeah. When it comes to, I just find it so funny because this whole time, it has been a habit to say Father, as to refer to God as Father. And I have been trying to stop saying it, but it is the hardest thing for my brain to do. And this whole week, I'm like, okay, you're doing a presentation, don't do it. Because in the morning when I pray, I end up saying it. I tell myself not to say it, and then tonight when that happened, I don't think we realize the power of habit, the power of doing something over and over again, how it just becomes automatic. And I guess it's just a good, I just wanted to illustrate that because it's up to us to educate ourselves And so even though I've been educated, I have the knowledge that God is not, he's not just a man, like he doesn't need to be seen that way. I have that knowledge, but it still takes time, like for me to change. And I think it's a struggle too, like saying brother or sister. Other people, I think it just comes naturally, right? So people will say that. And this is all part of, I think the second part of the nature of man that we really have to, hopefully somebody will do more presentations on, because it's so important to understand how we can educate ourselves to doing the right thing. I hope what I said made sense, but
I think we can also consider that same idea when we think about maybe particular sins that we struggle with. It takes a long time to change something as simple as saying Heavenly Father. And we can be really hard on ourselves because of maybe bad habits that we've cultivated throughout our life that we aren't changing overnight. And we have to realize that we've cultivated these habits for a long time, and that God recognizes that and he understands that, and that there's a process that it takes in order to resist that. And you shared a quote earlier about how to resist Satan, and I thought that was really helpful, because it's those ideas and things or thoughts are still going to come into your mind, and we have to actively catch them. And sometimes we don't catch them right away, and we can end up sinning, or we can end up saying Heavenly Father when we totally planned on not doing it. It's going to take time, and I think that we need to maybe be easier on ourselves, because I think that the pressure we sometimes put on ourselves in regards to reforms or sin or anything like that can cause us to sink into depression or feel hopelessness when God doesn't view us the way that we view ourselves. And when we do that to ourselves, we probably end up in a worse shape than if we don't do that, and we recognize that these things do take time.
exactly.
Moses was 40 years in Egypt, so he had to go to the wilderness for 40 to break God's habit.
Did you guys hear that? No?
Barely.
No,
Okay, Moses was 40 years in Egypt. What did you say? He was 40 years in Egypt, so he had to go 40 years in the wilderness to break that habit before God could use him.
Those are just my thoughts.
Those are just Trevor's thoughts. But yeah, I think that honestly, why I wanted so badly to do this study specifically was because when I thought about it, it just was so helpful to know that redemption continues in heaven, that motivating that it's a process, it takes time. And like Jonathan said, we can be really hard on ourselves, and definitely before this light, like there's so many times, and there are a lot of Christians I know that just want to hand in the towel. They can't do it. And with the light that we have, it's just really, it's just a beautiful message. And God is, you just see him so much
Amen.
clearly than anyone who ever in history would have, even those great reformers. It's amazing that we've been chosen. Really.
It's nice to know that the work we put in here actually counts.
Yeah. He said that it's nice to know that the work that we put in here on earth counts for something, and it does. The more we advance here, the closer we are to God, and in heaven, we'll still be at that same level. Any other thoughts, questions? I just thought there would be more discussion, so I ended as
Tiffany, I have a question, two questions actually. Do you want to just share a little more on, you made a comment at one point, God deciding to close probation. You asked the question, when does God close probation?
Mhm.
And then you answered it if I remember it correctly, how you put it, something along the lines of he just closes it whenever. He just decides to, it's been long enough, it's been time. You want to just unpack that a little bit more, please?
What were you saying, Trevor?
The point's been proven, I think, is what Tiffany said.
Yeah. So God, we don't know when he will. That's up to him to decide, but it couldn't have happened prior to 1798. So prior to 1798, Christ couldn't have come. So there were things that needed to happen in Earth's history, and after that point, then God could have come. He could have come at these different times. And that's all I was saying, is that we don't know when that will be, but he does make that decision, and he makes it based on knowing that it's been long enough. The point has been proven. I guess also he needed to give it enough time to show the universe that there are two kingdoms. There's Satan's kingdom, there's his kingdom, and they're both ruled and governed in different ways. He needed Earth to go on to a point in time where everyone could see how those two kingdoms are ruled. And I don't know if what I know what I'm thinking in my head. I don't know how to say it exactly, but I think history has gone on long enough that you know how God governs and how he rules, and you can see how Satan governs and how Satan rules. So it's just a matter of, at this point, I think, just fulfilling the last part of being made in his image and completing the test. Because like Christ's time, there were people at different stages being tested. And so we have to continue on through our testing time period to complete it.
Interesting, because at the cross, I believe the rest of the worlds had made their decisions. They had seen enough from that point from Alice for us.
Okay, Tiffany, so this time I heard you say a little more, it was dependent on human beings on Earth completing tests and in essence reflecting the character of God to some level, with the idea being that growth in heaven, redemption in heaven does continue. Because that was sort of just what I was wondering about a little the first time when you were at that point in the presentation. It tended to sound a little bit arbitrary. And I knew you weren't implying that God was going to be arbitrarily just decide, okay, time's up, now's the time, or anything like that. And I just wanted to hear you, expound on it a little bit longer. And okay, the second question that I had is just asking in terms of the transition from earth to heaven. And I think it touches on how you answered the first question a little wee bit that I just had. I didn't like the choice of words, but I had thought of it in terms of what is the criteria. As I say, it parallels or is impacted by the other question: when does God close probation? The transition from earth to heaven has to happen at a point in time. And to say, what is the criteria? In a sense, some of your previous answer helps answer that too, but I just wanted to find out if there was anything further you wanted to add in.
Can you repeat your question, Debbie?
Okay, we're on earth for a period of time and we transition to heaven. When does that happen? What is the criteria? God is the one, he's in charge. He is going to be the one that pulls the plug on his choice. But is it the majority of people that have made their choice for heaven, submitting to God? That number of people is made up. No more are going to join that group? Or what is the criteria that will warrant the change from earth to heaven, the transition from earth to heaven? Redemption, growth happens on earth. It continues in heaven. So as best you understand, what is the transition from earth to heaven? Like what?
I mean, I think somebody else maybe might be able to answer your question better than I can. But for me, if we look just at the time periods in the past of why Christ didn't come, it was because they were a line of failure. So we know that our history is a line of success. And so what God is waiting for is for us to be a line of success. And there are things in prophecy that need to be fulfilled yet. And those things didn't happen in the past because they were a line of failures. So once, like I said, Christ's history is the best history to compare it to. God is testing us now. We know the priests are wrapping up their line, and then he will go on to the church, and then he will go on to the world. And those things need to happen prior to him being able to come. They need to receive that knowledge, and prophecy needs, I don't know how to say prophecy needs to be fulfilled, but yeah, prophecy needs to be fulfilled.
Like when Christ said it is finished, he had things he had to do
Yeah.
before.
I guess what I'm wrestling with a little bit, Tiffany, though, is, in Ellen White's day, there were people that died in the third angel's message. Christ could have come for some people. There were some people, the Holy Spirit was being poured out, the latter rain was falling at that point in time, and it happened twice in history, 1858 up to 1863 in that period, 1888 into the 1890s rather. And so there were people, but the whole line corporately was a line of failure.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't come. We know, as you were saying, we know that Christ's line is a line of success, and that's what our line parallels. It is a line of success. Jesus will come again.
Yeah.
In this line. And all I was asking is, what is like I'm thinking back to some of the Spirit of Prophecy quotes that deal with that very thing of reflecting the spirit, or the character of Jesus, and it just some of the, I guess, more commonly known within Adventism different quotes. But this transition from earth into heaven, as you pointed out at the beginning of your study, many of us had that same kind of thinking, where all of a sudden it's going to be not that we'll be saved in our sins and suddenly made righteous or anything like that, but we probably were holding on to varying degrees of misconceptions that when Jesus comes, everything's all going to be, I'll just use the word, it doesn't really fit, but we'll be made perfect. We'll be, we'll live through heaven or in heaven and on the new earth for eternity. But we're unpacking more through parable methodology, the concept that we are going to be growing and growing and growing. And the level that we attain here on earth, in whatever dispensation in which we have lived, will grow from that point, as you've got on the chart behind you, we'll grow from that point on. So God wrapping things up so that the transition will happen from earth to heaven in our day. I'm not so much seeing a distinction. There's some people way over on one side of Christianity that in essence would say everybody can be saved. Mainly because we'll grow in heaven, or we'll. But I'm just trying to differentiate.
Maybe can I maybe possibly make a comment on what I think you might be saying?
Okay, sure, Jonathan. I need help.
So in 1868, Ellen White gave a quote that the Lord's Christ's second coming was deferred in mercy because God's people weren't ready. So it doesn't have anything to do with external events. External events are a part of the whole process, but what God needs for Christ to come, or what we need for Christ to come, is for the reform. God has a process, and we look at the hand, the 5 waymarks. So there's a process that has to happen, and within that process, there's a message that needs to be developed, understood by a group of people, given to the church, and then given to the world. And that message is different with each dispensation. So in order for the criteria that you're asking for, I think it has to do with the test of each dispensation and people to give that message in power, I guess. So without getting too caught up in the details, I think that the criteria is the reform lines. And God has a process. There's no arbitrary second coming of Christ. He's not just going to close the door arbitrarily for no reason. There's a process that it has to follow. And within Adventism, there's how many times I've heard people say, we're just waiting for Jesus to come. And I've asked people, well, do you think that Jesus could come tomorrow? And they're like, he could come at any time. I never understood why people would say that when they believed in a Sunday law and close of probation and the plagues and all these things, how they came to the conclusion that Christ could show up tomorrow. Like, were all those things going to happen tonight? So just, I guess, to keep it really simple, I think that God's reform lines follow a process, and Christ can only come at certain times in a dispensation. And that is completely dependent on what happens internally. God's reform movement that he raises up has to give this message in the dispensation that it's intended for. I don't know if that's what
Yeah,
you're
and
after.
if you think about 1860, so in 1850, they created another chart, and that chart was to evangelize. And we know in that history, they went back into Laodicea and they weren't doing the work that they were supposed to be doing. They didn't give the message that they were supposed to give, right? So they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Can I say
Right.
something?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Claudio.
Oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to add to that and say that it's a corporate thing, right, along the lines that we have a work that we have to perform, but it also comes down to the individual level, right? And we understand that. Okay, Claudia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Jonathan what he was saying. I think the saints, they have to live in the sight of a holy God without an intercessor. So that's the point. A group of people has to be ready to be without Jesus Christ in the most holy place and do not sin. You know, that's the test. And they have to be ready. And I think until God doesn't see that that group is ready, he cannot come. That's what I think.
A thought on that, Claudio, I
Eh.
just was having was that if Christ had if the 7 last plagues was the civil war in the history of the Millerites, and Christ would have come in that time, they still would have been sexist. And if they were sexist in the history of the plagues, in one regard, you could say that they were sinning. So I'm curious, and this is just, I don't know the answer to it, but I'm just wondering, and maybe it's just a rhetorical question for thought, is what do we mean when we say that these people have to be sinless through the time of trouble? Because there's certain things that they didn't even know was really a sin in their time of trouble, but yet it was. So I think there's some additional thought to that could be included in what it means to be sinless in time of trouble.
I think Tiffany answered that, that they were held accountable to the light that they had. So the light that they were tested on in their history is what God was requiring of them as far as perfection, but they weren't ready. And that goes into addition, the point that I think Tiffany was making, correct me if I'm wrong, is that God has to have a people ready in order for him to come. And in living in light to what God is revealing to us, that is perfection, living to the light that God gives us. Because if we are not living according to that light, then we're not living perfect lives. But you can't be held accountable for information you don't know. So I just wanted to put that in there, that I thought it was a beautiful thought that Tiffany brought out, that, in our generation, God is raising up a group of people that are living up to further light that to God's revelation of himself. And in that, the people who were in prior histories, they don't know what that experience is like. And so we take that experience, and then it's not saying that we're, because there's more light to be revealed, but as far as the information that we're given, we are honoring that light that is an additional light to what they had in the past. So when those people get to heaven, we all get to heaven, the priest will be teaching those who didn't have the light that we have, so that they are caught up. And because we have passed, it's in that we know that those who were in prior histories who did not have that same test will also pass it. I don't know, but that's what I was understanding. So correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding.
Can I please add to that?
Yes,
Please.
go ahead.
I just want to expound on what I was trying to say originally. We're tested as a group, but we're also tested as individuals, right? And the individuals make up the group. The stones make up the building, or what we consider the church. And if we're failing as individuals, we can't make up the group, right? And God needs both. He needs individuals who are making up a group who are essentially passing the test for their time. So I think Jonathan mentioned Elijah sinned after probation. Honestly, how I feel about his comment is that Elijah didn't have the light we have. So we're responsible for the light that he had as well as the light that we have. And we're being tested by those things as a group, but also as individuals. And that's why 1888 was a failure, a history of failure. They had the message, they were individuals who were passing those tests, but they didn't make up the group. So God needs both. I don't know. I feel like that kind of rounds off what people have been trying to say, including what you said, Tiffany, Claudio, Victoria. I don't know if someone else has something to add, but that's how I see it. And it's all dictated by the lines, right? The lines are a dictation of the experience of the group, but they're also a dictation of the individual experience, which happens at all different times because we all came into this message at different times.
Victoria, thank you for sharing what you said and clarified a little bit. I think initially the question I was asking about was, is God dependent on us? And the answer is yes. Much as he's going to decide when it is that he will wrap things up, he is still dependent on having a people who have taken in the messages, the cords, hanging onto the cords, the lines, and internalized them so that it is like eating the flesh of blood and of Christ and drinking his blood. And they're not perfect in the old conservative Adventist thinking of perfection, because there's still going to be growth, but there still is going to be a point at which God sees there are a people that are ready to, fit for purpose, that are ready to do his work, that have through eternity, that are servants. And it'll be made up of priests, Levites, and Nethinim. And everybody will grow according to the level of growth that they've done on this earth. They'll pick it up in heaven and keep on growing. But I guess, Tiffany, I was sensing a little bit of an arbitrariness just in the original way that you had worded it. But you actually clarified it when you answered my first question. And certainly Jonathan and Victoria, I appreciate you added in greater clarity as well, and a good synopsis, Victoria, actually. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tiffany, for your presentation, and thank you, everybody, for all your comments and questions and your perspective. And it's nice to be able to come together like this and to discuss these things. And I'm sure we've got a million more things that we could probably discuss about it. But for now, that might be it. And we appreciate you, Tiffany, for putting the study together. And we look forward to your upcoming presentations. And we'll be praying for you. If anyone has any final words or anything like that, feel free. And if not, we'll close the room. Looks like that's it. So thank you again, everybody. Good night, and we'll see you all on, some of you on Sabbath and some of you maybe next week. Good night.